China's population will plummet, and deaths from the epidemic will be the main cause. China's graduate unemployment crisis reaches breaking point. China's corruption crisis escalates as purges expose rampant graft-infecting party and military. China's economy slides into crisis, manufacturing shrinks, prices fall, jobs and livelihoods under threat. China's property crisis spirals as Beijing gets trapped between reforms and elite resistance. China's population will plummet, and deaths from the epidemic will be the main cause. For over a decade, experts have warned about China's impending demographic downturn as fertility rates plunged and society aged rapidly. Now, all indications show the crisis has reached a critical inflection point with no easy fixes in sight. Preliminary 2023 data revealing over 3 million fewer people is just the beginning if underlying trends aren't reversed. Soaring youth unemployment exceeding 20% and falling incomes, compounded by the pandemic fallout, have throttled birth rates for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, China's uncontrolled Omicron wave last winter is estimated to have caused excess mortality 3 to 5 times the official toll as the healthcare system collapsed under the surge. Long COVID and other lingering effects also threaten life expectancy gains. The twin black swan shocks of economic recession and public health disaster have turbocharged long-term demographic challenges. With fewer working-age citizens and more retirees than ever before, the strain on state pension systems is becoming unbearable. Local data paints an even grimmer picture, with places like northeastern Liaoning province projected to lose over 15% of its population in just the next decade. The resulting labor shortages jeopardize industrial regions driving China's exports. As a shrinking workforce weighs on potential growth, domestic consumption is set to further weaken, undermining Beijing's rebalancing efforts. Social stability could also rapidly deteriorate if living standards fall. Beijing's attempts to boost birth rates through child subsidies, paternity leave, and relaxed birth policies have failed to arrest the slide. Meanwhile, aging issues like elder care are woefully underfunded. Unless urgent and far-reaching reforms are enacted across healthcare, social services, female labor force participation, and beyond, China risks a demographic time bomb that unravels decades of development gains within just a few short decades. With one-party rule dependent on continued prosperity, the CCP's long-term legitimacy may be tested in navigating this crisis, which could spiral into a full-blown national emergency if not addressed comprehensively and immediately. China's population tipping point may have irrevocably arrived. China's graduate unemployment crisis reaches breaking point. China's job market has been deteriorating rapidly over the past year as the economy slows. The employment situation has grown increasingly dire, especially for recent graduates who are entering the workforce amid a significant contraction in entry-level opportunities. Official unemployment statistics fail to capture the full scale of the crisis. Data collection methodology skews rates downward by counting even minimal part-time work as employment. Independent analyses suggest youth unemployment peaked above 46% in early 2023 versus the reported 21% figure. The actual rate remains stubbornly high with no clear downward trajectory in sight. The lack of suitable white-collar jobs is evident from employment data published by top universities. At Fudan, only 18% of 2023 grads found direct placements, while over 70% opted to pursue further education. Shanghai Ocean reported a paltry 13.64% rate for undergrads. Most positions were obtained through Guanxi rather than qualifications. Anecdotal reports indicate the problem spans all education levels. Job listings are sparse while competition is intense. Many graduates take low-paying internships just to gain experience. Starting salaries have declined in real terms due to high inflation. The psychological toll of prolonged job searches is also significant. This sustained graduate unemployment crisis poses severe risks if left unaddressed. China's demographic dividend is dissipating as skilled youth remain underemployed or leave the country. Future productivity and innovation potential are compromised. Government finances weaken as tax revenues decline. Social stability could deteriorate if jobless numbers continue growing. Discontent is already visible in sporadic protests by bank depositors and home buyers opposing corruption. The property downturn only exacerbates the employment situation. To reverse these trends, bolder pro-market reforms are needed to incentivize private sector hiring. Targeted job programs must be expanded while outdated hiring practices reformed. Monetary and fiscal stimulus can boost aggregate demand if inflation is controlled. Without concerted action, the costs to China's economy and society will multiply substantially over the long run. The government cannot afford to be complacent in addressing this looming crisis. China's corruption crisis escalates as purges expose rampant, graft-infecting party and military. Explosive new revelations of rampant graft-infecting China's once sacrosanct military have exposed the true extent of the CCP's corruption pandemic and dealt a devastating blow to claims of victory in Xi's decade-long anti-graft war. Western intelligence reports suggest critical defense hardware was rendered useless by corruption, with watered-down missiles and faulty infrastructure raising dire concerns about the PLA's real-world combat capabilities. The scale of the ongoing purge, with over a dozen top-ranking generals detained in what is being called the largest internal investigation in modern CCP history, lays bare the sheer pervasiveness of corruption even within the party's most powerful institutions. It also undermines Beijing's narrative of the anti-corruption campaign's success, revealing deep-seated rot that has festered systemically over the long term. Experts warn perpetual purges are but a temporary salve that cannot root out corruption within a one-party system where power is centralized under Xi alone, with no independent oversight or political reforms on the horizon. Even critical sectors like finance, energy, and infrastructure now face intensified anti-graft efforts, confirming corruption has metastasized throughout China Inc. and the entire apparatus of the party state. With the economy spiraling due to COVID, property turmoil, and a looming demographic crisis, a severe loss of public faith in the regime could shake its foundations if rot within the system is not exorcised at its source. For Xi, navigating this existential crisis may prove the ultimate test of whether totalitarian hardline rule can survive its inner decay, or if more sweeping changes become inevitable. Observers say perpetual purges risk becoming a game of whack-a-mole without addressing root causes. For China's stability and development in the long run, substantive political reforms may be needed to curb the corruption that unchecked power and lack of accountability have allowed to fester systemically for decades. China's economy slides into crisis. Manufacturing shrinks, prices fall, jobs and livelihoods under threat. China grapples with relentless economic headwinds as New Tang Dynasty News reports a significant downturn in the manufacturing sector, a deflationary spiral, and escalating hardships for its citizens, foretelling a stark economic forecast for the world's second-largest economy. In a rare admission of economic turmoil, China's leader, in a New Year's speech, prepped the nation for the wind and rain of ongoing economic struggles. As some companies buckle under operational stress and many face grave employment and life challenges, the country's Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, PMI, in December tumbled to a contractionary 49, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. This downturn extends a 3-month streak beneath the critical threshold of 50, indicating persistent sector shrinkage. Simultaneously, consumer prices saw the most rapid decline in 3 years in November, with a 0.5% year-on-year decrease, a sharper dip than the previous October's figures, reflecting deepening deflationary pressures fueled by flagging domestic demand. Salaries in 38 key cities have also followed a downward trend, reporting a 1.3% decline, marking it the third consecutive quarter of such regression, the most significant since 2016, indicating that compensation is not immune to the broader economic downturn. The bleak economic landscape described by respected lawyers and economists, including Liang Xiaohua and Li Yuanhua, casts doubt on the optimism of China's economic policymakers, who had a 5% full-year growth target conditional on a 4.4% increase in Q4 GDP, a figure externally viewed with skepticism. Amid the grim outlook, workers from affluent regions like the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta have prematurely returned to their hometowns, driven by industry relocations and the crumbling of manufacturing businesses. The sweeping return-to-hometown movement in Henan's cities underscores the coastal economy's direct influence on domestic migrant labor. Local businesses, symbolized by a Shenzhen beef noodle shop experiencing an 80% drop in turnover due to diminishing worker presence, exemplify the contracting consumer market. Even iron rice bowl holders, a term denoting secure government jobs, aren't shielded from pay cuts, with some even encouraged to venture prematurely into entrepreneurship. Corporate giants such as Alibaba, Tencent, and Meituan reflect the contracting economy through dropping market values. A stark contrast emerges between state-reported economic growth and the ground realities of job losses, restaurant shutdowns, and widespread uncertainty. This economic unease is underscored by a chorus of terms like insufficient effective demand, weak social expectations, and domestic circulation blockages during a recent Communist Party Economic Work Conference, signifiers of an economy enshrouded in a profound crisis of confidence. With forecasts from the World Bank and Moody's suggesting a downturn in China's GDP growth for the coming years, the urgency for confidence-boosting reforms could not be higher. Otherwise, China faces a protracted period of weakened demand, corporate struggles, elevated financing costs, and a reticent private investment landscape, all of which erode consumer sentiment and impede economic recovery prospects. China's property crisis spirals as Beijing gets trapped between reforms and elite resistance. The once thriving engine behind China's exceptional growth, contributing an astonishing 30% to the national GDP, has imploded, sending catastrophic tremors across the economy and imperiling the very foundation of the Chinese dream. The real estate sector, long the bedrock of urbanization and prosperity, is now the epicenter of an economic downfall that is unrivaled in scale and scope. Home to the world's largest urban middle class, China's residential market has plummeted into a tailspin, with sales collapsing by more than 10% month after month, as homeowners rebel against a tidal wave of debt and uncurbed lending practices. Despite strenuous governmental measures to stimulate the market, including the people-land linkage proposal, there is no end in sight to this downward spiral. Investment, the lifeblood of the real estate industry, has slumped nearly 10% in the first 10 months of 2023 alone, a harbinger of economic stagnation. Critical related sectors, such as steel and cement, convulse under the domino effect of diminished construction activity, and local government coffers bleed dry without the financial lifeline from land auctions. An alarming number of developers, one estimated at over 100, including titans like Evergrande and Sunac, stand on the precipice of ruin, defaulting on billions in international debts. Across the nation, construction cranes stand as idle monuments to failed projects, with over 1,300 developments halted and millions of families trapped in a nightmarish limbo between investments made and homes unrealized. The government's proposals, which should defy these daunting challenges, instead skirt the systemic failures: inflated land prices, bloated inventories in ghost cities, and a glaring absence of a comprehensive property tax regime. While speculative gains continue to line the pockets of an empowered minority and local governments enrich themselves off the topsoil of the nation, the underlying economic imbalances fester unaddressed. Lip service to people-oriented reforms has borne no substantive fruit. The elite, wielding control over an estimated $5 trillion worth of housing wealth, stand as silent sentinels ensuring the perpetuation of the status quo, even as policy trustworthiness wanes and social stability dangles by a thread. With property comprising a staggering 28% of household wealth, a prolonged downturn could wreak irreparable damage on private spending, effectively gutting consumer confidence. The specter of credit rating downgrades looms large, foreshadowing an era of ballooning debts and contingent liabilities for the state, heightening the urgency for taxpayer-funded rescues. The clarion call for bold, transformative reforms cannot be ignored any longer. A definitive pivot from the construction-reliant economic modus operandi to a balanced, sustainable model is not merely imperative, it is a matter of national survival. Should the government dither or falter, the real estate collapse will inexorably infect the broader economic landscape, condemning China to a new normal of diminished potential and stunted growth.